What's up, everyone, and welcome into the Buffalo Sports Collective. It is Wednesday, July 12th, 2023. As always, I am PK alongside my co-host, Phil. Phil, I had a very interesting experience the other day on Monday, probably around 6 o'clock. So if you were in Western New York and looking upwards and you saw a one-propellered plane and a stupid human being jumping out of it, that was me.
Congratulations.
Thanks, man.
What was
I love to tell the tale.
Highs and lows? Hit me with some highlights. We haven't really talked about it too much ourselves. I know you did it, and it seemed like you enjoyed it. But yeah, highs and lows. Give me like a one highlight, one low light, I guess, if that's what you want to call it.
So the low was I knew going in, I already have issues with strong winds in my face. I've had issues at like the Cave of the Winds where you're getting like, what is it called? Like hurricane deck or something like that, where I struggle to catch
winds.
That's it. Yeah. So I just struggle to catch my breath. That's probably the best way to put it. I've been saying like I can't breathe. I could breathe, but it was kind of like, you ever get punched in the stomach and you kind of like lose your breath and you can't really catch it? That's kind of what it was.
The wind knocked
for like
out
30
of you, as they say.
Right. Yeah. That was my biggest worry because I know it's like 100 to 120 miles an hour. You're free falling to earth. And I knew I would struggle with that, and I definitely did. So 30 seconds, it was just me going. So I'm sure that came over beautifully on the audio. So that was my down. The positive was I actually went through with it because there was one part where you're on this tiny little plane with one propeller in the front. And I knew it was going to be a small plane whatsoever. And I don't like those queasy moments when it makes your stomach jump and stuff like that. And I was like, okay, whatever. They opened the door like midway through the flight just to like let the air in or whatever, and then they shut it again. And that's about the time where I went, I don't think I can do this. But then they go 2-minute warning, you got to put on your goggles, and they open the door again. And by the time you realize what's happening, they're throwing you out the door. So my favorite part was kind of like just the glide down. Like once I was able to catch my breath and we were actually the parachute open and we were just like gliding around. That was my favorite part, just looking around. I don't think I took advantage of that moment enough where I was just like looking around, taking in the scenery because you could like gliding down for 4 or 5 minutes. I don't think I appreciated that enough. So I'm not saying there's going to be a second time, but if I could ever figure out how I can catch my breath doing this, I would do it again.
I was going to say, so not that you wouldn't do it again, like you said, like you enjoyed it for sure, but like your ideal situation, like you're more hot air balloon where you're up super high enjoying it while you can breathe versus kind of floating / free falling. For how long did the free fall last before your parachuting?
To me, it felt like a minute, but
I mean, that seems like a long time when you really consider how long a minute actually is.
I was told it was like 30 seconds. So,
so it's super quick that you're free falling and then you glide the rest of the way?
Right. The whole process up, I was like, okay, everything I read, breathe in through the nose, out through the mouth. In through the nose, out through the mouth. And as soon as you jump out of the plane, you forget everything they told you. I was doing the running man in midair when you're not supposed to. You're kind of just like supposed to like arch your back and like free fall like this. There was a guy that was videoing it and he caught me and I was not doing that for the first 10 seconds until I was able to like compose myself, realize what was going on, and then I was pretty good. He tucked my legs behind him and kind of like locked me in the position so I couldn't struggle. But definitely couldn't catch my breath. And the 3 other people, one of them including my wife, were having the time of their lives and loving it. And I love the last 4 to 5 minutes of it.
I do wonder how often, like exactly what you were talking about, one of our other friends has gone skydiving. I haven't talked to Ashley too much about her skydiving experience. I know she went a long time ago as well, but another one of our friends was talking about it, and she mentioned that the same thing. Like as soon as you jumped out, she forgot everything and just started freaking out. I wonder how like terrifying that is for the instructor. I'm sure they're extremely used to it. Like that's probably what happens on, I don't know, at least 50% of the jumps, people are just freaking out. So I'm sure they're used to it, but like, it's got to throw you off a ton that someone that is physically strapped to you is just freaking out and just trying to calm them down in order to actually like do your job properly. I feel like that's got to be scary for the instructor.
Right. I wasn't like trying to rip off the parachute or pull the parachute or anything like that. I think it was just more like it's when you like almost like, I'm not calling it strangulation, but almost kind of like that where your legs are flailing. Like I was still holding on to my suit like you were supposed to.
Yeah.
But my legs were not tucked back like they were supposed to. And you saw that on video. And the guy who was just like practicing video goes, oh yeah, like it'll be ready in 10 minutes if you want to see it. And my group was like, oh yeah, we want to see this video. And they definitely deserved it because I struggled a bit in the first 10 seconds. But I did it, Phil. And if you want to join with me and learn more about my experience, you can follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Buffalo Sports Collective and on Twitter at Buffalo Sports Go. Actually, we're still on Threads now, too. Well, not still. We moved over to Threads just in case the Twitter disappears. So we're over on Threads, which is through Instagram. It's the big new craze. We haven't done anything over there, but we secured our name, so we are over there. Go ahead and give us a follow over there as well, Buffalo Sports Co. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel wherever you listen to podcasts. Check out our website at buffalosportscollective.com and look for the time breakdowns in the description of the show. We got 2 segments on this one, Phil. Bills are starting up training camp at the end of the month. I think it's like the 23rd or the 24th, something like that. It's not that big of a deal yet because it's still a couple weeks away. But my question to you is, and since we're kind of in the offseason of most of the sports here, we can get a little bit more creative. And we said we were going to do this. And we both have these, and we can start 3-1 like we did the last few episodes like this. What are the top 3 ways, minus injuries, that the Bills, that can stop the Bills from winning the Super Bowl this year? We've had 13 seconds. We had the Cincinnati defeat. We had multiple other things before those 2 devastating playoff losses. I guess what could be that situation, and we'll start with your number 3 reason, that the Bills, minus injuries, because we know injuries hurt everybody, so take those out, that would stop the Buffalo Bills from winning the Super Bowl at the end of this year?
I did look at your notes and notice that 2 of your 3 are what I was thinking as well. So I will try to quickly pivot to something else that I was thinking also was kind of a backup. So I guess I'll start with my backup one because it wasn't really one of my top 3 to begin with. But the CBs, to me, are a question mark heading into this season in a way. Yes, we know Tre'Davious White is incredible, but we haven't really seen him bounce back the way that we know how to play. He's not really at Pro Bowl status, or wasn't pretty much all of last year. I think he was getting there and was starting to play better, but I still don't think we've really seen him at the level that he was before his injury. So to me, that's a big concern. And then Kaiir Elam, obviously headed into year 2. What can he do as well on the other side as a CB2? Can he step up? Is he going to be, we thought that he wasn't given a big enough role last year in general. I thought that he could have performed, I don't want to say better, but it could have performed just a different role in the team if they had allowed him a little bit more freedom, but they kind of kept him sheltered a little bit last year until toward the end. So it'll be interesting to see what a full year of him looks like. And then you have Micah Hyde coming off an injury. Jordan Poyer was beat up all last year. Yes, he played well, but again, also injured. So I think they have the players to do it, but it's, can they repeat what they did, 2-3 years ago when they were all at the top of their game? I mean, Poyer's another year older. He's coming off a lot of injuries. Hyde's coming off a lot of injuries, also a year older. Kaiir Elam's only in his 2nd year, and Tre'Davious coming off that terrible injury. Yes, he's had some playtime now, but we, again, haven't really seen him go back up to the level that we know he can play at. And they have some decent people behind them, like Hamlin, like Taron Johnson, like Dane Jackson. So they have some depth, but I mean, that's your core that you need to play extremely well. And especially with how the league is going. I mean, you've seen all these teams in the AFC get extremely pass happy with Cincinnati, with Kansas City. You're going to have to go through those kind of teams in playoffs. So you need an absolutely dominant, defensive back. And can they just get back to that level this season?
And I think that's a major component to this that's been kind of overlooked, is the cornerback position. And even if you want to toss in the safeties as well, because you don't really know what Micah Hyde's going to look like coming back from that neck injury. Jordan Poyer had countless injuries last year. Remember the elbow that he had to pop back in at that point?
It was gross.
We had Tre'Davious White, who knows if he's going to be back to the All-Pro. I can't imagine he's going to be back to the All-Pro just
right.
because it's tough to get back to the position. You're 2 years older than you were when that injury occurred. And then on the other side, are you going to go back to Dane Jackson, who I've been on this podcast not a big fan of? I think he gets ripped too much, just burned too much. And then Kaiir Elam, he came out strong at the end of the year, but he struggled early. So I think that's a position where they definitely, I don't want to say they've overlooked it, but I think us as this podcast and us in Buffalo have kind of just assumed that position is going to turn out well and just hope for the best. For me, though, I definitely agree with the cornerback position. For me, it's more what happens if nobody in the wide receiver room steps up, including Kincaid, and you're left with just Diggs or die again. I mean, last year, Davis did get hurt with the ankle injury, but he didn't make that next step that a lot of people were kind of hoping for after that big Kansas City game, the 13-second game. They had to bring back John Brown. They had to bring back Cole Beasley. McKenzie is now gone. Shakir never played up to the role that I think we were kind of hoping for, even though I know he was a 5th-round pick. How much can a 5th-round pick really step into this? But this year, I think you really need that true number 2 in this offense to help Allen, to help Diggs, because right now you're a two-show pony until somebody steps up. You got Hardy, Davis, Sherfield, Shakir, even shorter. You can toss in Knox, Kincaid, Cook, Hines, Harris. I mean, there's a lot of pieces on this offense. We just need one, and it would be great if 2 players just kind of stepped up. But you definitely need a true number 2 in this offense if you want to compete with the top dogs like Kansas City, like Cincinnati, because Cincinnati's got a 3-horse race. They got 2 number 1s in their wide receiver room. I mean, Kansas City's got Travis Kelce, and then Patrick Mahomes throwing to him. You can make any star wide receiver. They lost Tyreek Hill and were a better wide receiver room altogether. They had better numbers without Tyreek Hill. So I really think that one way that the Bills can be stopped by not winning the Super Bowl is nobody steps up behind Diggs.
Yeah, that was one of the 2 that we had copied on. So I will agree completely, because I also thought that as well. And I will kind of let it pass because part of the point I was going to make on this one as well is one of our other combined reasons, and I will
number 1
let that I'll let that slip until we get there. So I agree completely, and the talking point I want to make we will get to later, so I will let that go until then before I just start talking about it. So my number 2, which again, I think this one actually was not a pivot. This is the only one that we didn't have as a crossover, and I think they've improved and gotten better, but again, another just concern going into this season for me is in the trenches on both sides of the ball, on the offensive line and defensive line. I think both sides have gotten better. If both sides stay healthy, I think you have a better unit than you did last year, but it's just something that the Bills have been looking for on both sides of the ball for years now and just haven't seemed to really find something that works extremely well, despite having a top 5 offense and a top 5 defense. You really just haven't had that solid of a defensive line and that solid of an offensive line. And obviously the playoff game last year against Cincinnati, we kind of know how it went. A lot of it went wrong in the trenches, getting Allen a lot of time to throw the ball and then just not getting to Burrow at all. So, I mean, I think that's going to be a huge talking point again this year. I think it's upsetting a little bit that it continues to be a talking point year after year, but I think it is with most teams. If you don't have an already ridiculously impressive line like some of these teams do, then it's going to be a major talking point because it's a big part of football and a big part of the team. So I don't know. I think they, on paper, they look good, and I think they have brought in the pieces to be better this year and compete a little bit more in the trenches, but it's just, can they put it all together? Can they stay healthy, and just, can they make it work?
Yeah, I think the offensive line will be better. I think the right tackle is their weakest position by far. If Spencer Brown can come back, I know he didn't really have a offseason last year coming back from that surgery, so he didn't really have a true training camp. He's only going to be entering his 3rd year, and everybody always says, especially around Buffalo, that their 3rd year is the breakout year for some of the players that have come to Buffalo. So hopefully Spencer Brown can take that out. The defensive line, it really comes down to, in my opinion, the health of Von Miller. When he was in the lineup, they were one of the top pass rush, getting to the quarterback in the entire league. And if he misses a substantial amount of time, which he doesn't seem like he's going to, but he also said he was going to be back for the playoffs last year. So you can never trust the players. They want to be back. They will say they'll be back, and then they're not back, i.e., Keenan Allen, i.e. when the people were saying Josh Byrne was going to be back the next day because he said he was going to be back the next day. Never trust the players. But I think that's a big glaring hole if you want to knock Brandon Beane for anything, is his inability to have hits on his picks at the defensive line. Gregory Rousseau seems like he could be a decent player moving forward. I think he definitely needs a Von Miller on the other side. Boogie Basham's been a bust. AJ Epinesa has been a bust. He's invested a lot. Ed Oliver hasn't been the type of player they had envisioned, but they added Leonard Floyd. They've brought DeQuan Jones will be back healthy fully because he was desperately missing the Cincinnati game. So I think the lines, the trenches are going to be a big point. So I think that's a huge number 2 for you. I agree completely. My number 2 kind of relates to that as well, the defensive line. Sean McDermott, if he struggles to be head coach and defensive coordinator in game time decisions, being a head coach and a DC, it has been done and it still is being done, but you kind of see a lot of times that the head coach that makes the play calls on the field, and a lot of times it is on the offensive side, so take that with a grain of salt, but they end up having to take a step back because they can't really focus on the actual game and game time decisions and game time calls when they're making the calls on defense. Will his calls on defense affect what they do on offense? Like, how will that affect his decision making as the actual head coach? He's just so detail oriented on every single thing. I'm wondering how that is going to affect his play calling and his game management, because that's already, if you want to really knock him on something, I know I already knocked Brandon Beane on the defensive line, but if you want to knock Sean McDermott on something, his decisions in game time has been one of his weaker parts of his game. His timeouts, his uses of timeouts, his challenges has been terrible. I mean, 13 seconds, it comes down to the coach. Whether you want to blame him for the miscommunication, he called 2 timeouts and they stopped there. So I'm wondering, I think that's another way that the Bills could not win the Super Bowl this year, is if Sean McDermott struggles being head coach and defensive coordinator, trying to separate both of those kind of things.
And do we know how much he was calling plays as a defensive coordinator in general before? Not much, right?
What I heard was he would give input every once in a while and he would call them every once in a while, but for the majority of the parts, it was Leslie Frazier. And I don't know if that's ever been, fact-checked and proven, but I think that's what's been going around, is like 99% of it was Leslie Frazier.
And that's the other part. Like, how will he do as a DC in general? We don't really know what his game calling, game playing, just as the defense is going to be. Obviously, the unit seems to have enough talent to carry through kind of whatever, but we haven't really seen him as a defensive coordinator calling all the plays, even just for the defense, let alone being head coach. So I think that's another very interesting development that he'll have to go through. And like you said, I mean, he already struggles a little bit sometimes with game time decisions. So adding another element to it, and a pretty big one, it's not really a small one. It's managing an entire half of the game very detailed while also trying to manage the complete game. It's going to be interesting and definitely I don't want to say struggle, but a challenge for sure for him. And we'll have to see how he steps up into it.
So Phil, what is your number 1 way, minus injuries, the Bills will not win the Super Bowl this year?
Yeah, we combined on this one, and we didn't look at each other's list beforehand. We pretty much never do, but we're usually on similar wavelengths with a lot of this stuff. 2 of the 3 were correct. And yeah, for my number 1 and yours as well is just Dorsey struggling as an offensive play caller. I mean, we know what happened last year. We were extremely excited coming out in the first couple of games. I loved everything they were doing. I loved the short passes. I loved getting it out of Allen's hand quick, and they were moving down the field methodically. They were kind of using their passing game as a run game, and they were putting up big points against good teams and looking amazing. And then they went away from that completely, struggled at times. Obviously, they still had a very good offense, but a lot of it was Allen playing hero ball and doing the best he could with what he was given. And I don't think he was given enough to really succeed as a quarterback, or a good one, given the amount of talent on the team. So similar to your number 3 with all these wide receivers, who can step up as a number 2. Obviously, Davis has had his struggles, but at the same time, how much of it's play calling? Shakir looked really good in the role that he was kind of given and allowed to do. He just wasn't on the field all that often, which, like you said, 5th-round rookie, you're not really going to expect him to be a major part of the offense, but maybe this year they give him a bigger role to step into. Kincaid and Knox, what can they do together? The Cook and Hines combo out of the back. I mean, it's just all going to come down to, can Dorsey find a way to elevate these players and find a true number 2 on the team, even if it is Davis? Can you find a way to elevate his skills more, or do you find someone like a Hardy, a Sherfield, Shakir, Shorter, anyone else that can really step into a true number 2 role? But a lot of it, I think, still comes down to play calling and getting creative and finding a way to utilize those players in their best ability. I mean, we see it with other teams finding ways to, it was similar to the Sabres and Granato, finding players who, might not be great at this, but he really leans into their strengths and kind of develops around the team and not the team around them, like Kruger did, where he was just kind of forcing square pegs into circle holes. I mean, it's the same thing here. Can you find a way to utilize all these players' strengths and find a way to get creative with the offense and make these players thrive rather than forcing them into a system that doesn't work for them and not being able to adapt to it?
Yeah, it's kind of hard to knock Ken Dorsey because out of the 19 games, including the 2 playoff games that they scored or they played last year, they lost 4 games and they scored under 38 times. Let me double check this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 9 times. 9 times they scored less than 30 points. So it's kind of tough to knock him. I mean, they only scored under 20 twice. One was the Jets loss where they put up 17 and the 10-point loss 10 points they scored versus Cincinnati. So it's hard to really knock them, but it kind of felt like, I don't know if it was just me, if you feel the same way. A lot of it seemed just, it felt so difficult for them to score sometimes. Where it was just like, okay, Allen, go out there and do your thing. You got to save us. And a lot of the times, yes, he can save you. That's how you won 13 games last year, how you beat Miami 34-31, but then you ran into Cincinnati and lost 27-10. But I think it's just the creativity was gone. Like you mentioned early in the season, it was like Allen was taking what the defense was giving them, and they were just moving up and down the field. It just seemed like it was so difficult for them to move the ball. And I don't know if that was just because, beyond Diggs, who do they have in the receiving game? Knox isn't a true, possession tight end. They didn't really have anybody behind him. You had Gabe Davis, who was nursing an ankle injury, and then he really didn't step up. He had a lot of drops as well, catches that he probably should have made. But beyond that, McKenzie didn't step up into the role that we thought he was going to. James Cook wasn't really involved until the end of the season. So it was a big head scratcher for me last year, where they went with a rookie offensive play caller. And I went, this is weird that they're relying on a rookie in a win now moment for this team. Now the training wheels are off. He's no longer a rookie. He's been in the position for over a year now. This is his second full offseason in the offensive coordinator position. So the verbiage should be there. The play calling, the mind should be starting to blend. That's the word. I don't know why I was trying to put an M to start that, but blend. But melt. I don't know. Melt and then refreeze together. Who cares? But the training wheels are off. It's time for this team to run with the top dogs. I think they have the pieces. I don't think they have a true number 2 on this team, but I think there's an opening for the number 2. Like we said with my number 3, we need a wide receiver to step up. Can that be a Gabe Davis in a contract year? Can that be a Hardy who's got unbelievable speed? Sherfield, who's got unbelievable blocking, but I think he was underused in Miami because they had Waddle and Hill there. Harris, Kincaid, you drafted him to be that slot tight end. It's just I think the pieces are there for the creativity to come from Ken Dorsey. I'm just hoping and pretty much praying that he can figure this out. But I think between us both, and I think that says something, that if Ken Dorsey struggles to get creative and can struggle to get consistency out of this offense, it, yes, was one of the top scoring teams in the league, but the second half of the year, they were struggling to score points, and you could tell that they were struggling to move the ball on offense, and we were relying too much on Allen. So if you can, how many off seasons have we said this, Phil? You got to get more, yak yardage and stop relying on so much of Allen do or die. And yes, quarterback position should account for 70 to 80% of the yardage. But, where's the swing passes? Where's the jet sweeps? All of that left with Brian Daboll. I'm hoping that Ken Dorsey can dig in his back pocket and find that and pull it out and use it this year.
Yeah, I think an unfair comparison, obviously, is to the Chiefs. That's who you aspire to be, but, that's one of the best coaches ever out there, but exactly what you said about their offense is they have Kelsey, which everybody knows about, to cover him. And other than that, they really had, for the most part, a bunch of injured no names. I mean, yes, Smith-Schuster.
Juju is a TikTok star.
Right. And MVS is something. I mean, they're not complete no names. They're something, but for the most part, they didn't have all-star wide receivers, and they never really have outside. Obviously, they had Tyreek Hill, so that's saying something. I mean, he's incredible. But, I mean, yes, like this last year, like you just said, they had Kelsey, and that was pretty much it. They didn't really have a true number one wide receiver. You can argue they didn't really have a true number two wide receiver, and yet they put up 41 receiving touchdowns, had led the league in touchdowns, and like you said, all of their passing stats increased with the, removal of Tyreek Hill. And that's nothing against Hill. It's just incredible what their coaching can do to find a way to get creative, to get all these players open. And yes, they have Mahomes, who's incredible, but Allen is also extremely good at what he does. So it's just a way of getting more creative with the very talented offense the Bills have, and just finding a way to make some more magic happen and less of a predictable offense where it's run, 3rd and 10, launch it way downfield to Gabe Davis and hope he gets a touchdown.
So those were our top 3 ways, that, minus injuries, that the Buffalo Bills could possibly not win the Super Bowl. We know they're going to. I predicted them to win it, but those are 3 situations out of our control that might stop them from winning the Super Bowl, top 3. So, Phil, we will move on to our final segment here, and I don't know if you've been paying attention to the NLL world. I don't know if the listeners have. I don't know if people around the NLL have been paying attention, but there were 2 massive deals done the last 2 days. Saskatchewan pulled out a deal from their butt on Monday, sending Mark Matthews over to the Toronto Rock. Yes, the Toronto Rock that the Buffalo Bandits smashed in the second round, or the semifinals of the Eastern Conference. The Rock sent Zach Mans, forward, Adam J, defense, and their 2023 first-round pick over to the Rush for said Mark Matthews. And then the very next day, Patrick Dobbs and Cam, I don't know why they had to send this guy, Wengreniak, I think that's how you pronounce his last name, to the Rush for pick 5 and the rights to Matt Beers. Matt Beers is a UFA, so they have until August 1st to negotiate a new deal with him, but he's the only team that he can talk to right now, so they're hoping that can get him signed. But Saskatchewan Rush, completely new makeup. They got a couple free. Robert Church, I believe, is a UFA as well, but I think they can franchise him. I can't be quoted on that just yet, but I'm still working through all that to try to get all the numbers and everything. But Matthews is scheduled to be a UFA. I'll talk a little bit more about that first deal because that kind of affects us. He's coming. He can't be franchised at the end of next season, so he's definitely going to be UFA unless they try to Rock franchise him and he accepts it. But he replaces Zach Mans and Dan Dawson in that lineup. More Mans than Dawson because he's a lefty. Corey Small is a lefty and is UFA. Currently, Mark Matthews is the only lefty on the true forward. I'm sorry, he's not. They currently have one righty forward, and that's Tom Schreiber. Dawson retired, Keogh is a free agent, and DeWick, he is under team control, but he needs a new deal. And then you got Jalen Rogers, who's a transition player, but he also plays a ton of forward. For the lefties, Matthews and Craig are the only lefties left. Mans got traded, Angus is a team control player, and Small, like I said, is a UFA. So their forward group is definitely changing. It changed a lot last year as well. I'm assuming Small's going to be probably coming back if he wants to, but they got to reload on that right-hand side. But Phil, I guess real quick before we dive into our Bandits segment on this one, what were your thoughts on Mark Matthews coming over from Saskatchewan to the Rock and how that kind of affects how the offseason might go for some of these Eastern Conference teams, especially Buffalo?
I mean, it's definitely interesting because it's not something you often see with the West Coast to East Coast swing. So that right off the bat is a little interesting to kind of just put it out there. Obviously, he's one of their...
I think he's around here, though. I think I read that he lives more towards East Coast than West Coast, so I think this kind of helps him out a bit.
So that explains a little bit of that. Obviously, he's very good at what he does. He had 98 points last year, which is nothing to laugh about. Pretty solid in that department. Yes, he's a very good forward, but like you said, I mean, yes, Dawson's gone, and Dawson was the opposite side, but at the same time, Matthews is more of an assist guy, more of a setup guy, which is similar to Dawson. I know Dawson was, up there in age and starting to lose a little bit of his form, but I think he's going to be a huge kind of component to set up Schreiber. I don't think he's going to be your Josh Burns style dominant lefty. I think he's going to be more of your Dane Smith style assist machine, especially with Schreiber on that team as the righty. I mean, those two on opposite sides, I think, are going to be pretty lethal with Matthews setting up Schreiber and Schreiber shooting another 30 to 40 times a game like he loves to do. I think that is a pretty solid 1-2 punch for them as far as a right side and left side forward. I mean, those two are a good way to captain your offense. I mean, the Bandits obviously have Dane and Josh. I think Schreiber and Matthews, I don't think are quite at the level of those two, but it's still a very solid lefty-righty 1-2 punch, and it's going to be good for them. I mean, like you said, their left side was lacking a little bit, even though Corey Small had a monster year last year and did a really good job for them. I don't think Matthews is quite the same style of player, so I think he's going to bring a different kind of element to that team.
Yeah, I think this is definitely a future trade for the Rush. You can kind of see that with them trading their 5th overall pick for Patrick Dodds, and I really like that deal for them. But also moving on Mark Matthews for a younger Zach Mans and even Adam J. They're both younger. They're both 27 is J, and I think 24 is Mans. So they're going in a different direction. They're retooling, and I really like what the Rush are doing. For the Rock, this is a win-now moment, and I think they know that with Rose getting up there in age, with Schreiber over 30, I believe, with Corey Small older, Rogers and Craig are both under 30, but still, I think this is a win-now moment for them. I think it's a 2-horse race at the moment for the Eastern Conference, and it's Buffalo and it's Toronto, and I think this deal kind of, I'm not saying they put them over the edge of Buffalo, because I think Buffalo is still well ahead of them, but I think this definitely, they saw what happened in the playoffs and knew that they needed more goal scoring, because if Tom Schreiber goes out, they don't really have a ton. Mark Matthews, like you said, is more of a setup guy now in his older years. I think he's 33 maybe. But I think definitely he still adds a lot to the offensive unit. And I think adding him to Craig and Schreiber, that's a 3-headed monster. And if they get Small back, that's 4 really good players up in your forward group. And they added a nice piece. Yes, it hurts them for the future a bit with Zach Mans, who everything I'm reading, if he gets the minutes and he's killing it in the summer league, he can be a number 1 for a team. So Phil, this really got me thinking. And Steve Dietrich is known to make moves all the time. I mean, you see him all the time in the offseason. He made one move this season, sending Vason, got it. Vason for Bomberry with the Albany deal. He's always making moves. He's always looking to make his team better. So it got me thinking, what are your top 2 trade pieces that if you could go get, who is at the top of your board that you would go get? And I know this is a little bit more difficult because you and I are still trying to put the pieces together on who's a UFA, who's a free agent, who still has contracts. Still working through it all. There's still pieces that I'm just struggling to find. So hopefully, the NLL can put out a nice list for us again before August 1st. But I guess we'll start with number 2. Who's your number 2 trade target this offseason if you could go out and get?
So this was really tough for me because I think trying to think as realistic as possible.
Right.
The NLL is a league where you're still in your prime in your 30s and you're young from 21 all the way to 30, I would say. And then 30 is pretty much your prime, or 26, 27, 28, 29, 30. That's your prime. So trying to take good players away from teams anywhere in that range is really difficult. And obviously, rightfully so. It's a building block for that team that they're hoping is going to be there for years. So to me, it was very difficult to kind of piece this together because I was looking at, 30 and up if possible. And at the same time, looking at teams that aren't in win now mode that are willing to do it for picks rather than a player, because I think the Bandits would much rather give away any kind of draft picks when their team is already loaded and they don't really have room for the guys they have on their team already. So if they can get rid of draft picks, I think it's kind of what they're going for. But in order to do that, you really want a kind of rebuilding team or a team that did okay last year, but still wants some pieces for the future and is kind of just putting it all together. So after looking at all the teams, became very difficult for what I was looking for. There really wasn't a lot out there, so that got a little bit depressing. But I will say I have 3, and 2 I'll kind of combine together because they're on the same team. So the first one, though, is one that I wanted last offseason. So as a trade partner, I will go for him again. He had a bit of a down year, so you might be able to get him for something a little bit less. I think on a better team that isn't struggling as much, he can have a kind of revitalized season. But Kyle Matisse is one from Philly. I don't know what Philly's really doing. I think they're still in quite the rebuild mode. I know they got Mitch Jones, who had an absolutely monster season once he came over there. They have Joe Rosateris. They have Ben McIntosh. They have a good team and pieces around it, but I think they still need more. And Matisse is up there in age now. He's 34. I think he lives somewhere in this general area, or, just in the East Coast to begin with. So last year, he only had 31 points. He had 80 loose balls and 4 caused turnovers. So again, bit of a down year, but the big thing with him is he is a solid transition player. He is a solid leader, and he's not going to be kind of blocking anyone on the Bandits. I think the Bandits, and that's the other thing with the Bandits, is we kind of talked about this on a previous podcast, like what kind of mode are they in right now? Obviously, they have all the pieces to win now, and I think that should be their mentality still moving forward. But at the same time, we kind of talked about they finally got that championship. So at what point do you kind of not give up by any means, but start looking a little bit toward the future where you want to go a little bit younger, or you want to start getting some of these draft picks to, really look for a true Priolo type replacement, because even if he comes back next year, he might be gone the year after or the year after. So you need somebody to step up into that position, and maybe you want to start drafting those players now. So by the time that he's ready to kind of just move on with his career, that guy's already in place. So the Bandits are in a interesting situation. To me, they're still in win now, though, so I think getting a veteran transition player like a Matisse would be perfectly fine by me.
You're bringing me back to the days of last year when we're going, Matisse is still a free agent. Go get him. Go get him. But he just signed a 3-year deal last year. He's the captain of Philly. He's got 2 years left. He's 33 going on 34. I would love him coming here. And I think that would be the type of piece that we were looking for last year, and I think it's the type of piece we're looking for this year. And I think I agree with you, and it's similar to what I was doing. Was I was looking for guys that are right on the edge of their prime or going right out of it, but also on teams that I don't think can compete for the title. And if, in my opinion, if you can't compete for the title, you should be looking to capture that next wave of top talent and looking for what happens after those top tier teams kind of fall back to earth, and that's Buffalo and Toronto. And I think Buffalo and Toronto are in win now modes, and I don't think there's any. I think as long as Matt Vince is between the pipes, and as long as Josh Byrne and Dane Smith are on the team, I think you're in win now mode. For Toronto, as long as you got Jalen Rogers, Tom Schreiber, Nick Rose in net, the defense they do, they're always going to be in win now mode. I don't think there's. I know you get older and you try to rebuild, but until you get knocked down, why would you do anything else? So I think for Philly, they're definitely in, retool mode, kind of like what Rush is doing. I don't know if they're actually going to do it because, they just added Mitch Jones, right? Yeah, they just added Mitch Jones, who's 31, to go with Joe Rezateris. So I don't know if they're ready to do it, but if they are, I'm looking at his teammate, and I'm going Chad Tutton, and he's another guy that I wished would have came to Buffalo last year. He signed a 2-year deal with Philly last year, but he was his first year away from Georgia last year after signing the 2-year deal with Philly. He's a true force on the back end. Philly is... I don't think they can compete. I really don't. Halifax is right on the edge, and I think Rochester is right on the edge as well. But I think every other team below them kind of needs to have a really lucky season to jump past Toronto or Buffalo. He's on the wrong side of 30. He's 31 years old, but with Leclerc gone, you need another bigger body guy back there. I know McKenzie played pretty well. You had Bomberry back there, but I think wouldn't it always be nice to have another bigger body back in the defensive end? You can never have enough defensive pieces. Best season last year as a pro. He set career highs in loose balls with 124. Career highs in caused turnovers with 29, which was 8th in the league, and he had 12 block shots. He had 13 the year before, so 25 block shots in the last 2 years. I think this is another player that I was calling for last year, and I'll call for in the offseason for a trade is Chad Tutton. So, Dietrich, go make these moves, please. Maybe a 2-for-1 deal.
Yeah, I'm all about a guy with really high caused turnovers, as we both kind of are, and I don't think you can ever really have enough shutdown incredible defensemen. So anytime one becomes available. If he is something like that, I am all for that. Also, on that team, I don't think you'd ever be able to get him, but just with the Chaos connection, Blaze Riordan, I would not mind that as well. I know he's a forward,
Lefty.
which the Bandits definitely don't need, but he is another one of those bigger-bodied forwards, so not knowing what's going on with some of those players. What?
He's a former Bandit.
Right, exactly. Former Bandit, currently plays with the Chaos, plays with all the Bandits over there. He's one of those guys, I mean, he plays goalie for them, but he's still a very solid forward for Philly. He had 73 points, and again, he's that bigger-bodied style rumble kind of forward, so something the Bandits could always use another one of. I don't think that would happen because I think Philly loves him, but wouldn't mind that either. But moving over to my, I guess, number one, I got two that are pretty similar on the same team, so it's going to be... I don't know. I mean, there's one main one from this, and I guess it depends on really what aspect you're looking at. But I guess my other one is going to be Jacob Roost from the Las Vegas Desert Dogs. They're a team that I think still needs some help as far as what they're doing. I think they have a lot of pieces that are very young. I mean, it's kind of what happens with an expansion team. I think they're going to continue to get better. I think they can continue to use draft picks to their advantage, and he's a kind of forward to me that looks like a transition player. I know he's labeled as a forward, but he had 30 points with 11 goals, 19 assists, but the big thing to me that screams transition player, he had 119 loose balls and 11 caused turnovers, so I know he's labeled as a forward, but he seems like a offensive forward transition type player, and I was trying to think of a Bandits comparison. I don't really have it off the top of my head. I guess Ian McKay this year, if you want to throw him as a forward who was also transition, who also played a ton of defense, and he's just incredible. But that's the kind of player I think the Bandits need, is that transition guy. Preferably, I'd rather have him more of an Ian McKay style like they did this year with a defenseman who can also kind of play offense and be that transition guy. And that's like the unicorn/dream. And luckily the Bandits have one in Ian McKay. Thank goodness for us. But Roos seems to be that other kind of transition type player. Again, 119 loose balls, I think was second, it looks like, on their team. So pretty solid for a forward. I don't really know, again, why he's not really labeled more of a transition player, but that's the kind of player I would love to see the Bandits get, is just a true transition forward, a guy who can put up points, put up goals, put up assists, but also has those caused turnovers and loose balls to go along with it.
Yeah, he came over from Albany. He's got 1 year left on his deal, 30 years old, righty. So, I mean, if Kyle Buchanan doesn't come back, maybe that's the type of player you're looking for, the guy that grinded out in the corner. I think I was definitely in on him last offseason as well, but I guess if you want to combine, who is the other guy you were thinking maybe for a 2-for-1 from Vegas?
The other one was Tor Reinhold, who I would imagine is related to Reed, who we also like quite a bit, but he's much more of a defenseman, which I really don't mind. But again, 144 loose balls. He led their team, and also 14 caused turnovers, which is pretty decent. So he was a little bit more of the just defensive style. If the Bandits want to go a little bit more D heavy, I like him as well. But honestly, again, like I said, I kind of struggled finding pieces on teams that would logically make sense to both sides, where the team is struggling a little bit, might not be in the chase like you were mentioning. So you can kind of force that player away with the trade, but also somebody who is not in the prime of their career that team needs for their future. It was very tricky to find that balance, and I struggled quite a bit with it, but here we are. I
do like it. I don't know if they're in the market for another forward. I guess it depends on how they feel about the young guys and about if Kyle Buchanan comes back and if Brandon Robinson is healthy. So I'm wondering what that would look like. But definitely both of those guys have 1 year left. They're both 30 and over. So it's definitely one of the areas that we're targeting. For my number one, I'm looking for what you described in your number two with Kyle Matisse. And it is another transition player where we said it in the offseason. And I think I said it on the last show, and we said it all throughout the entire season. If Ian McKay goes down, there's not another Ian McKay to replace Ian McKay. There's not even a number two guy behind him. And your transition game would go from what it was this year to what it was the year before, which was kind of non-existent. And I think they kind of made it that way because as soon as they get the ball, full line change every time. But for me, it's Jordan McIntosh. transition player from Georgia. I understand he is the swarm captain, and it'd be hard pressed to get him, but I just love his game. He's got 2 years left after signing a 3-year deal last offseason. Yes, Georgia just missed the playoffs, but I don't think they need to lean into that. I think they need to lean into getting younger. And yes, I don't think they can compete with Buffalo or Toronto. And that's kind of what I've been saying this whole offseason now, and in this segment as well, is unless you can compete with the top 2 dogs and you think you have the pieces that you can do it, I think Halifax is close. I think Rochester's on its way. So unless you're one of those 4 teams, I think it's time to retool and aim for being in your prime when those teams are coming out of their, heyday. I mean, he was 5 goals, 14 assists, 19 points in 17 games last year, 132 loose balls, 26 caused turnovers, was 12th in the league, and 10 block shots. He has been in Georgia since 2016, so it would definitely be difficult to pull him away. And I guess you wouldn't really have a say because this is a trade, but I mean, I think they take in players' opinions on these type of trades a lot more than in any other sport. He did have a down year last year, but in 2022, 19 goals, 35 assists, 52 points, and he played more forward. Isn't the type of role you kind of want, that transition type guy that can also put in the net. He would be a bit older at 34, but he's under contract, and you want to help your back end in your transition game as much as you can. I love Jordan Matisse's game, or McIntosh's game, and combine both of those guys. I guess I want both, but he also takes some faceoffs. So if Max Adler does go down and you don't want to rely on Nick Weiss or Chase Frazier or any of those guys, he can also, square off in the faceoff dot as well. But those are my top 2: is Jordan McIntosh and Chad Tutton.
Were Matisse and McIntosh on our list last year?
Yes, because they were both free agents.
Yeah. And here we are.
It's weird they pop back up, but now that they're trade chips, Phil, maybe we got a better chance.
Maybe. I mean, now you're trying to give something away, and I don't know what the Bandits are going to do with their draft picks. We kind of struggled predicting it last year because, again, their team is just loaded. I mean, you've been to 3 straight finals and you won 1, so I don't know. I mean, we kind of said it in our what they need to do to repeat. They just need to be healthy and be the exact same team. So it's very hard to find room for draft picks, let alone room for trades, but there's always room to improve your team. I mean, sometimes I think as Bandits fans, especially as homers occasionally, even though we try not to be, I mean, taking your emotions out of some of the trades that, if you lose this player, it stinks because we are pretty emotionally attached to all of them just being on the team, and most of them are really, really good, and you don't want to lose any of them. So I think trades kind of become difficult to make when you love everybody, but there's always ways to improve the team, and I know Dietrich is always out there, like you mentioned, looking for ways as well. Jeremy Thompson on Georgia would be another one, but I think he's too Max Adler based, where he's obviously Georgia's faceoff guy, but he's 36, so he kind of fits that profile. I don't think he'd ever leave Lyle. I think they love playing together, so I don't think you would really see him leave that team unless something crazy came up. But again, 168 loose balls, 14 caused turnovers, that true transition weapon. Only 9 points, but again, on Georgia, I mean, yes, they had a pretty solid offensive back end of the season, so I'm not going to try to say that his stats could have been a little bit better there because they put the ball in the net really, really well at the end of the season. So, but he's another kind of just that prototype player, but we'll see. We'll see what the Bandits can do. Like you said, Toronto already making some noise. Saskatchewan making a lot of noise, trying to just improve their team and be a little bit better than they have been. I think they are not used to being in the position that they're currently in, which is just not one of the dominant teams. For so long, they were one of those top teams in the league. In the last few years, they've kind of fallen off. So I think they are itching to get back to the top.
Yeah, for the Buffalo's picks, because I know you mentioned it really quick for the draft. From what we have, they have a first, no second. They got a third, a fourth, a fifth, a sixth, all of their own. They don't have anybody's. But next year, in 2024, they have Buffalo's and New York's from the noseworthy deal. So that could come pretty valuable if New York struggles this year. But yeah, it definitely looks like they do have some trade pieces available in the in the draft market. But you got a big stacked roster once again, even if some guys don't come back. Like if Kyle Buchanan doesn't come back, they could just replace him with somebody in-house. And I think that's something you got to take into account when you're also looking at these deals. And I know some of the fans might just look at this and go, well, why wouldn't you just go get, Zach Higgins, or why wouldn't you just go get Nick Rose to, in case Matt Vince retires, or go get Tom Schreiber from Toronto, or go get Joe Rezateris. I don't think those type of deals are happening with Buffalo because, one, it doesn't really seem realistic to do. Two, it would take a hefty price to go get them. And three, why would teams like that trade those pieces to teams that they're competing with and trying to beat? Especially like a Tom Schreiber or Nick Rose. Why would they do that when they're competing for Buffalo and trying to get past Buffalo? They would be helping Buffalo rather than trying to, add pieces to those players that they have. So hopefully, listeners look at this and see that, trying to be more realistic of what possibilities are out there. No idea if any of these are even rumors or any of these guys would even possibly be on the trade market whatsoever. But I think I think you can kind of see the direction we're looking in. It's kind of help the transition game and help the back end a bit as well. And then if you can add another forward, if one of them walks out the door, that's another added piece. But Phil, fun show, fun list building with you. Anything else to this episode before we shut it down? And we'll be back next Wednesday.
Yeah, just as a quick kind of example, I guess. I know he was coming off an injury, so it's a little bit tougher to kind of make the comparison. But Mitch Jones was traded for Steph Charbonneau, if I am saying that right. I'm going to assume I am not, but he's a solid defenseman that the Warriors received, and then a first-round pick and a second-round pick for Mitch Jones, who, like you said, is a little bit older, but obviously went to the Wings and absolutely dominated. But that's kind of what it takes to get one of those players, is you're going to have to lose a top talent on Buffalo. And I just don't think, again, it's kind of hard because we don't want to lose anybody, but I don't know if the Bandits really want to part with anybody unless it's someone like a Mitch Jones or someone that is just truly elite that the Bandits think can take them to a whole nother level, which, I mean, you just want it all, so I don't know what that level is. But unless there's a player out there that a team really wants on the Bandits, that would hurt to lose. But the only way you're doing that is if you're getting something ridiculous in return. But even on top of that, it's going to take a really good player, likely a younger one, like maybe the younger Robinson. But then it's also going to take, on top of that, a first-round pick and a second-round pick. So, I mean, how much are you really willing to lose to get that kind of player? And again, it just depends on who's out there and what they're looking at. But it's hard to really go after a lot of those deals when you just won the championship and your team's pretty solid.
Right. I think we had this issue last week when we were building how can they repeat, is you kind of summed it up. They just got to do what they did this year minus the injuries. And it's kind of hard to find pieces to add to this team when they look so good and there's so many still question marks out there. But with the deals that were going down, you kind of got that little bit of an itch that you wanted to scratch. And
absolutely.
I think I'd
love to see a trade. I don't even know.
Right.
I don't think the Bandits haven't had a huge one in a while because their team is very set. I mean, Bomberry was a huge addition to the team in general. He was a clutch addition, ended up getting a little bit injured here and there, but I think he was a very solid defenseman for them. I mean, that's one of the biggest additions they've made in recent memory, and it was a good one mid-season to kind of make and to help the team. I know at the time you and I were a little bit questioning it, but again, it's that kind of trade where it's a younger, promising forward for a defenseman. It's going to be that kind of situation where you're definitely going to have to give something up that you might not want to, plus some picks in order to get something really good in return. So it all depends on really what the Bandits think that their holes are and what they need to repeat next year.
Yeah, and with this type of team, I don't think you're going to be getting a piece for the future. If you're going to be making a deal, it's going to be a piece for the future that's already here, for a piece to help you win now. Kind of like what we saw with Toronto, where they sent out a promising young Zach Mans and a first-round pick this year, which I think is 13 or 12, one of those two, for a now 1 year kind of rental player in Mark Matthews, of course, unless they re-sign him. But that's kind of what this type of deal would probably look like for Buffalo without knowing all the specifics and stuff like that. But because they're in win now mode, it would be like a younger player, which I'm just tossing out names, like a Brad McCulley, like a Dylan Robinson, like a Sam LaRue, one of those younger promising players for a piece that is more like a veteran that is a proven talent to help them win now. But again, it's so difficult because the team just won a championship. There's not too many holes in this lineup whatsoever. So it's kind of like picking and choosing where you want to go and what pieces would have to go out the door for it. And if they don't make a deal, they don't make a deal. They don't have to make a deal. They're the defending champions. So you're the champion until you get knocked down. So, I mean, how many moves can you possibly make to improve your team whatsoever? But Phil, are we good to turn off the mics and go to bed?
I think so. That sounds lovely.
That works. My feet will remain on the ground for at least this week, and I'm not planning on jumping out of any planes. So I will be back next Wednesday, minus, something catastrophic. I don't even know why I put that in the world. But thank you all for listening to another episode of the Buffalo Sports Collective. Follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Buffalo Sports Collective and on Twitter at Buffalo Sports Co. We are also on Threads now at Buffalo Sports Collective, I think it was. I think I said Buffalo Sports Co. at the beginning. I think it's Buffalo Sports Collective there. I will double check and have that for sure next episode. Visit our website at buffalosportscollective.com. Subscribe to our channel wherever you listen to podcasts, and make sure you leave us a review on Apple and Spotify. Until next time, bye-bye.